Ancient Rome, while nowhere near the biggest empire in world history, was arguably one of the most successful, as attested to by its sheer power, influence, and especially longevity. The Mongol Empire, for instance, may have been more than 4 times larger, but it didn't last anywhere near as long as Rome. Granted, the Roman Empire had a very different style of government, one that would influence contemporary governments, from that of the United States to the KhAnubis Discord server. And we've already talked about how powerful Rome was in its heyday, but just how did Rome govern all its vast holdings for all the centuries it did? First, let's go over a bit of history. Since, as anyone who knows Roman history knows, Rome changed quite a bit over the centuries. Starting off as just another Latin-speaking city-state in the 8th century BC called the Roman Kingdom, then having a king who was so bad they abolished kings altogether and turned the whole thing into the Roman Republic, which by the 3rd century BC had started to conquer more territory, and finally reaching its territorial height as the Roman Empire. Later dwindling down as, well, technically still the Roman Empire, but it didn't have Rome in it and they spoke Greek, so many historians call it the Byzantine Empire instead. In this video, of course, we'll be focusing on Rome at the height of its power and influence. To truly explain Rome's central institutions, though, let's start off with how the Senate was made up. First, Roman society was generally divided into different classes. Aside from slaves who didn't really have any say whatsoever in politics, Roman citizens were divided into super wealthy patricians and the plebeians, who were basically everyone who wasn't super rich, namely the working class. Patricians were generally members of noble families, and later on also successful businessmen and large landholders. And of course, for the purposes of this video, I'm saying businessmen here because, well, ancient Rome. Though the patricians were a minority of the population, they generally had the most say in Roman governments, making up the Senate as a whole, comprised of a varying number of patrici, from where we get the word patrician, who generally serve for life unless charged with a criminal offense. The Senate was originally made up of 100 members, with that number increasing to 300 under the Gracchi brothers, then 900 with Sulla, and then 1,000 with Julius Caesar or Julius Caesar, and finally being capped at 600 under Augustus. The Senate, however, wasn't the final authority on passing of new laws, though they did manage foreign policy and the treasury, and advised the 2 consuls, each elected by the Roman citizenry for fixed 1-year terms. Consuls were the highest political office in the Republic, and were elected by the Centuriate Assembly, or Comitia Centuriata, a military assembly also tasked with electing consuls and praetors. The 8 praetors were judges of Roman law, whereas the 2 censors were responsible for maintaining public morality, as well as the official census. The tribal assembly, Comitia Populi Tributa, was an assembly of all Roman citizens, divided into one of many different tribes, and which elected aediles, responsible for public buildings and games and government business, and quaestors, who managed financial and administrative affairs. The plebeian council, Concilium Plebis, was the principal assembly of the plebeian class, and elected the plebeian tribune, Tribunus Plebis. With the 2 consuls being the highest-ranking members of Roman governments, there were always 2 at a time, as a way of limiting each consul's power. During a military emergency, however, the consuls could appoint a dictator for the next 6 months or until the emergency had been taken care of, whichever happened first. Dictator was very much an actual position in the Republic, not the name for an autocratic leader, and a very powerful one at that, though one that still had plenty of checks and balances on it. Then came the emperors, who of course couldn't be seen as kings. They were merely a kind of first among equals, but definitely not kings. No, totally not. When Augustus took power in 27 BC, in fact, the Senate didn't just dust off some old crown they had lying around in storage for the last 5 centuries for some reason. Rather, the powers and responsibilities of emperor, derived from the already existent title imperator, which was more equivalent to a supreme commander of sorts, were more cobbled together from many different titles. Augustus, for one, did not consider himself a king of any sort, but he was the so-called princeps civitatis, or first citizen, and the Senate granted him powers of supreme military command, tribune, and censor in an arrangement that just so happened to be lifelong, and that upon death he would pass on to someone named Tiberius, who just so happened to be his stepson. The popular assemblies were also disbanded, and the Senate, while still holding political power, slowly became more and more ceremonial. In a sense, it was kind of like what countries like the United Kingdom have been going through in the last century or so, just the other way around. Hang on, I think we just hit something. Wait, hang on, we just hit 100,000 subscribers. I think that calls for a live stream sometime in the next week. So if you're watching this video just after it came out, be sure to check either the pinned comment or the community tab within the next few days, so you can find out exactly when to tune into this live stream. I mean, seriously, we'd really love to have you. Thank you so much for getting the channel up to this point, and now back to your scheduled content. That's all well and good, but of course, Rome wasn't the only area held by Rome, not for a long shot. The Roman Republic and later Empire were both divided into provinces, much like most of the countries of the modern world. But these weren't necessarily provinces in our modern sense. Originally, back when Rome only controlled the southern part of the Italian peninsula, a provincia was merely an area that was the responsibility of a particular general, guarding the towns and trade routes within the area. Eventually though, as the Romans started to conquer more land outside the peninsula, the Senate would draw up new special charters, lex provinciae, based on reports sent back by the generals who conquered the region. These special charters defined the borders of the province and what towns and cities they would include, as well as the rights and duties of the inhabitants. The Senate would then appoint a magistrate to rule as governor, along with a quaestor and 3 lieutenants, or legati. Or at least that's how provinces were administered during the Republic. This system was ripe for abuse, however, and no surprise, this would be reorganized under the Empire. During the Republican era, governors had near complete control over the provinces, which often led to widespread extortion of those within said provinces. Emperor Augustus reorganized the provinces under 2 different categories, senatorial and imperial. The senatorial provinces were led by governors known as proconsuls, who were former consuls or praetors who served year-long terms, whereas the imperial provinces were ruled by pro-praetorian legates, representatives of the emperor who served indefinitely. However, due in part to the sheer size of the empire and also the lack of any internet, most of the provinces generally ruled themselves, largely keeping their old ruling structures, provided they were friendly and submissive to the imperial government in Rome. Cities often governed themselves and the countryside around them, though were organized into different categories depending on if the residents had citizenship rights, from Roman coloniae at the top with full rights, to municipia made up of non-Roman Latins, and then cities with no citizenship rights that either had to pay a tribute to Rome or had special treaties. This system allowed the empire to have actually quite a simplified governmental system for the amount of land and people it governed. The Roman government was clearly not one that would exactly be praised in the modern day, but it did help the empire stay in shape, and led to a 2-century period of internal peace and stability called Pax Romana, lasting from Augustus's ascension as emperor in 27 BC to Marcus Aurelius's death in 180 AD. Over time though, this system would in a way collapse under the pressure of the very empire it supported. Its administrative and military lines stretched too far and too thin, and rival groups all fighting over the elusive title of emperor. Even though technically the Roman Empire didn't really fall in 476 AD, the lessons from the 3rd through 5th centuries in Western Roman history cannot be ignored in the modern and future eras. I mean, I suppose that's kind of why it's so important to learn history. Thank you as always for watching. If you enjoyed this video and or found it informative, you can really help out the channel by liking and sharing and subscribing for new videos every other Sunday, or the day before if you pledge any amount on Patreon.